Hello everybody, it's Kara from Wild Book Garden, and today I am finally here with the last part of my March wrap-up. I will link the other parts down below. Content warnings, links, you guys know the drill. Let's just get into it. So, the next book I finished was Wednesdays in the Tower by Jessica Day George. This is the second book in the Castle Glower series, which is a middle grade fantasy series following primarily our main character, Princess Celie, or Celie, and their magical castle. And she and her family live in Castle Glower, which is magical and is always kind of like rearranging its rooms and doing kind of fun or interesting changes. And then one day she finds an egg, and it's clear that the castle wants Celie to protect that egg and to take care of it until it hatches, and so she's trying to keep that from everybody else. And then there's also there's some things that seem to be happening with the castle where they're not sure why it's like having problems. And I did a horrible job of explaining this book, but I actually really enjoyed it. I think I had put off continuing the series because I know this is like a ridiculously specific thing, but I feel like it's not super uncommon in these kinds of middle grade fantasy to have like a part of the plot where they're like hatching like an egg, like a dragon egg or, you know, griffin egg or like something like that. Like for whatever reason, I feel like that's a fairly common thing in like certain kinds of fantasy. And I don't know why, I just like always find that really uninteresting, even if I end up liking the story overall and like the magical creature. So I put off reading this one, but I really liked it. I think I enjoyed it even more than the first book. I really love Celie as a main character, and I love the way that Jessica Day George writes all of her characters and like all of their like relationships. She's great with like family and friend groups, and I really love how even the side characters who you don't see a lot or who maybe Celie doesn't always get along with, they still feel like complex people. Like they're like, she has like her older sister who is, you know, much more concerned with like how she looks and things like that, but even though Celie like doesn't get that, that's not her thing, and sometimes she and her brother will like make fun of her, like tease her sister for that. It's never like not like other girls, it's never mean-spirited, and her older sister is still a very capable and competent person. I also really liked where the plot went in this one. There were some things that surprised me, and yeah, this was just a really lovely cozy story. I gave Wednesdays in the Tower 4 stars. Very excited to continue the series. Next, I finished The Wolf of Heathclove Manor by Clarissa Kay. This is a very, very short romance novella that is in the Saddles and Scoundrels series, I think. They're all like, they all involve, I think, women who are like horseback riders. And this follows our main character, whose name I can't remember, Josie. And she's American. She used to live in California, but then she ended up falling in love with this man from Wales, and they got married, and so she went off to live with him, and turns out he's horrible. And when at this point he has died, and Josie is like relieved to finally be free, and she kind of is thinking of just going back home to California to her father, but she's gonna try and stick it out a little bit longer because she I think she like doesn't want to basically give up so easily, even though like her mother-in-law is really horrible and trying to like make her go home as well. And so one day Josie ends up crossing paths with Cyril. Okay, I'm just gonna read the like sentence on the back because I'm just not good at summarizing things today. It says, when wolves threaten her home, newlywed and widowed Lady Josephine Darrow rides through the dark woods, risking the ire of the recluse Earl, Lord Tennyson, a man rumored to be as wild as the wolves. So yeah, they end up meeting, and that's like what the story is about, is like their relationship. I hated this. Yeah, like I could not stand the love interest. I really didn't like how bossy he was. I also don't like the way he treated everybody else in the story, and I feel like there are some ways that we could have dealt with his like some medical trauma that he has in ways that were more thoughtful than what happened here. Josie herself was fine, but like I hated the romance, so even though I didn't mind her, it still wasn't an enjoyable experience to read this story because like the romance is a big part of it. And I also hated how like Josie is like her father, I think, is a horse breeder, or like he works with horses, and so she works with horses and she knows a lot about them. And so near the beginning of the story, when she first meets Cyril, she's like insisting that she knows what she's doing, which she does, and she should. Like the story would lead you to believe that she does know what she's talking about, but then he ends up being right that she like, oh, she couldn't handle her horse, and so he has to like rescue her, which I thought was so stupid. The two of them had absolutely no chemistry. I also found the writing like really like awkward and clunky, and there were some sentences that I had to go back and reread multiple times because I didn't understand like how we had transitioned from like one part of the paragraph to the next. I also thought his antagonism towards Josie was really unpleasant to read. So he knows that her husband was horrible. Like, he hates him. Like, the two men did not get along. But I don't understand why he would automatically assume that because Josie has married him, that she is awful as well. Because I think, like, other people are not, like, in general, I feel like people aren't really aware that her husband was such a terrible person. So, like, why would it not occur to him of, like, well, maybe I should meet her, you know, and, like, see what she's like? Because maybe she got fooled by him, too. Like, it really pissed me off. Like, you guys know I love a well-done hate-to-love romance, but this was not well done. I also hated the fact that what first makes him like start being attracted to her is like he realizes what a good time he has riling her, and that is like never something I'm gonna find attractive pretty much. I really didn't like that. And then also just like a personal preference thing, I am not at all into the like big giant man could crush tiny dainty woman thing. Like that element of their romance and of them being like physically like attracted to each other did not do anything for me. I just don't find that romantic. I find it a little weird when that's fixated on so much. I also thought the plot of this was just plain stupid. Like, it's just utterly ridiculous and boring and also frustrating. It's all those things at once. I also, just like another thing I didn't like about the writing, I find it a little odd that in only 65 pages, our heroine explicitly compares the love interest to her father 7 different times. And not in like just like a passing like, oh, like I really like talking to him about my interests, like my dad's the only one who usually does that or something, but like really specifically connecting like her romantic feelings, like things that she loves about this man that she's interested in with like her dad. Like, it just, I don't know, the way it was written felt very strange to me, and again, I don't think the writing was very good overall, and I think that's another example of that. Also, I know these are like tiny things, but because I'm already complaining, at one point Cyril refers to his grandfather living in the Edwardian era, which I think is, I mean, I don't think people would have called it that even at this point, and also it makes no sense for the time period that this story is supposed to take place in. Like, the way that these characters are dressed and the way that they're acting, that, no, it doesn't make sense that his grandfather would be from the early 1900s or late 1800s. So, and then another thing is I find it utterly ridiculous, and this is like speaking from somebody who lives in California, who has spent most of my life here, the fact that like Josie has barely been in Wales, I think like a few months maybe, and you're telling me that she's sick of the rain? Like, no. I'm sorry, I'm calling BS. Like, I'm not saying that people who are from areas that are very prone to drought could never get tired of rain. I'm just saying that, like, that was yet another little detail that I'm like, this just feels like you didn't think it through very well. She even is, like, specifically thinks about how, like, oh, yeah, like, rain is always a big deal back home, but now I'm so sick of it. Like, it just, anyway. Those are, like, the little things that don't matter that much, but I also had all those other problems with this book. At the time, I gave it 1.75 stars, but, like, I cannot remember why I didn't give it a flat 1 star. So, maybe that says something, too. But I hated this. Do not recommend. Next, I finished the group book for Tor.comathon, which is Even Though I Knew the End by C.L. Polk. This is a really interesting genre blend. Whoops, I just dropped something. This is a really interesting genre blend where it's, like, a historical fantasy noir with also like a murder mystery element, and overall I really enjoyed this. It's a super interesting, like I said, it's kind of noir feeling, so there's those elements that feel kind of like an alternate, like maybe 1930s, 20s era, but with magic, and it's like this really interesting world where there's a lot of different like supernatural creatures or beings, and our main character is a woman who, I cannot remember her name because I don't have the library book with me, but she kind of gets dragged into this murder investigation that she wasn't planning on being a part of, and it turns out there is something much darker going on than she initially thought. It seems like there are multiple killings that are connected in some way, and there's also a lot of pressure on her and on these characters in general, because we know that this main character's time is running out, that she's made a deal, and her time is almost up. And I don't want to say too much more than that. The writing is definitely a very strong flavor, this kind of like noir feeling, but I actually really liked it. I think it lent a lot to the setting and the story. I overall enjoyed the characters of this one. There's a sapphic romance that I think, it's funny, like the romance itself was lovely. Like it was a nice kind of bright spot for some of this book. But the love interest herself wasn't super well developed, but I found the main character really interesting, and there was one character who shows up partway through who I thought was fascinating. They were like by far my favorite character. And I also think the way this book talks about like angels and how it uses that as like a way to explore the concept of like belief and faith, I just thought was incredibly interesting. I also love that this book proves once again that like just having a book in a particular genre, like noir for example, does not mean you have to duplicate all of the things that have traditionally been problems in those genres. Like, this is not racist or sexist, and it's still great. It's still a noir, so that's pretty exciting. I found the plot and the mystery really interesting as well. Like I said, I thought the world and the setting and just like the general ideas in the story were super interesting. And this was gonna be a 5 stars for me. Like, I was loving pretty much everything about it, but then, funnily enough, the end is what really just kind of soured my experience. I still gave this book 4 stars, so I still really enjoyed it and would recommend it, but I have some significant problems with the ending and with specifically the way that I feel like the ending is trying to make us feel, because I feel like we had both too much information and not enough information. And I'll link our live show discussion of this book down below, but like a lot of, I think, how this ending is gonna land for you, I think depends on the conclusions you draw from other parts of the story, because based on what I think we were given, I find the ending incredibly selfish and not romantic at all, and kind of it like sort of doesn't make sense to me. Like, I get what the author is trying to say about like love and like the things that you'll do for people you care about even if you think you wouldn't and that kind of thing, but I don't like how it happened at the end. I don't like, again, how I feel like we were supposed to be feeling that this was so like romantic and this like expression of love, when I think it actually isn't that at all. I think that for this ending to work for me and to just like make sense to me, I think we either needed more information about like why the main character was doing this instead of something else, because from my perspective it seems like they're like choosing basically being unhappy forever for the short-term benefits of maybe being happy now for like a few years, which just like doesn't make sense to me. And I know that people make bad decisions all the time, but like there's specific things about the way it happened in this story that I think just weren't developed very well. So either we needed like more information about why this happened, or we needed a lot less information. Like, we needed it to be a lot more vague, because like I'm reading the ending and I'm like, but based on these other things that we know that we saw earlier, this choice does not give you what you think it gives you, or just doesn't click with the feeling that I think the author wants us to have with the ending. So anyway, I really enjoyed everything else. I gave, even though I knew the end, 4 stars. But yeah, opinions vary on the ending. I really didn't care for it, but I know some people did. And again, check out our live show. Next, I finished The Ghost in the Big Brass Bed by Bruce Koval. This is the 3rd and final book in the Nina 1011 series. And I really, really enjoyed this. I've enjoyed this whole trilogy. It's about a young girl, Nina, and her best friend, who they realize that they have an affinity for seeing ghosts. And in each book of the series, they come across a ghost that is connected to some kind of mystery, something that happened in the past and that they need to try and fix in the present in order to kind of like lay this ghost to rest. And this one is a young girl, and she's the ghost in the Big Brass Bed. And yeah, I just really enjoyed this. I enjoy the characters. I like the friendships and the relationships. I also really appreciate that the adults in the story, like specifically Nina's dad, like when the kids are first telling him about like what happened, their experiences with ghosts, he obviously is like you know, okay, you guys were playing a game, that's fun. But when he is confronted with like incontrovertible proof of what happened, he doesn't waste time like not believing them and not letting them do what they need to do. He does help them take care of themselves, like he wants them to be safe, but he doesn't like lock them in their rooms saying like, oh no, you guys don't need to help a ghost, you're being silly. Also, the ending I thought was really well done. The endings of all three books have just been really good and really like emotionally poignant, and I really like them. I also think for books written a few decades ago, they're like surprisingly forward thinking. As I've said with the other books, there are definitely some terms used that we don't use anymore, but like the general ideas about like acceptance and like different people's experiences and things like that, and the presence of side characters who are, you know, people of color and things like that. I think that actually is fairly good. I do think that the mystery of this one wasn't, I don't know, it didn't land for me like quite as well as in the other books, but I still really enjoyed this book in the series. I enjoyed the whole series, and I gave The Ghost in the Big Brass Bed 4 stars. Okay, I'm gonna try and get through these before my camera battery gives up on me. Let's see if we can do it. I read A Bear's Bride by Sherry L. Tapscott. This is the third book in the Entwined Tales series, which, as I've said before, they're fairy tale retellings by different authors, and they're not really connected at all. And our main character is named Sophie, and this is a retelling of East of the Sun, West of the Moon. And she ends up finding herself at the castle of Henry, who she has heard is like this scary, like monster kind of person, and turns out of course that's not actually the case. And I liked this, but I didn't love it. I certainly liked it more than the second book in the series. I really loved our main character Sophie, especially in like the first half of the book. I just found her really like funny, and I respected her motivation of like wanting to do well for herself, basically. So I really liked her a lot. I also really loved the changes the author made with the original fairy tale, and like some of the specific like the journey part at the end especially I really enjoyed, because I'm actually not the biggest fan of East of the Sun, West of the Moon. I don't really care for that fairy tale, so I really enjoyed the way the author changed it. I also appreciate that Sophie and Henry actually like spend a lot of time together when Henry is not a bear, because that's another thing I don't like about the original. And then I also really loved one of the side characters, Ambrosia, who is the like troll princess. I love the way the author wrote her. She was probably my favorite of this whole book, and probably my favorite part of the book. But other parts of it kind of left me underwhelmed. Like, I thought the romance was pretty lackluster. Like, I liked some of their interactions at the beginning, but it was just one of those things where like the intensity of their feelings just felt kind of silly, and not very well founded. I gave this 3.75 stars. Like, I liked it, but it's not, I don't think it's going to be a highlight of the series for me. Next, I finished The Moth Keeper by Kay O'Neill. This is a fantasy graphic novel, and it's a lot about like healing and responsibility and like burnout and taking care of yourself. There's like our main character is part of this community that their awake hours are during the night, and she is the one who is tasked with being the moth keeper, so taking care of these moths that they use for light and that are very important for their community. They use them for, I think, a few different things, and she's responsible for like guiding them and taking care of them, but it's a very lonely job. And our main character, Anya, is really struggling with not wanting to let people down, but also like she clearly is not taking care of herself the way she should. So I thought this was really, really lovely. I loved Anya as a main character, and I felt for her a lot. I really connected to some of her personal struggles with like, you know, taking on too much or doing things that she shouldn't worry about because she doesn't want to like let people down. I enjoyed the art as well, and I thought the messages of this graphic novel were really lovely, like just those themes I talked about. I also enjoyed the setting and the world building, and I liked the little bits we saw of kind of like subplots or like other parts of the setting I thought were really interesting. The only thing I didn't love is I had a hard time with some of the transitions between illustrations or between like parts of the story, but I also am not like a graphic novel expert, so it might be that that's more like me than the book. But overall, I loved this, and I gave The Moth Keeper 5 stars. Next, I finished another fantastic picture book. I told you guys like this month was just one of the things that defines it was the number of fantastic picture books I read, and that is That Flag by Tamika Fryer Brown, illustrated by Nicholas Smith, who illustrated 1619 Born on the Water. And these illustrations are just, they're so like evocative and like beautiful. I love them so much. And this is about a young black girl and her best friend, who is a young white girl, and they both live in the South. And it's about like the Confederate flag and the difference between knowing history and glorifying it. And it's about like what this flag actually means. Like it talks about, you know, some people will say like, oh, it's just Southern pride, it doesn't mean that. And this book really shows that that's not the case. It shows like you cannot separate something like this from its history and from the harm that it does to people and that it has done to people. And I think all of this is done in a way that is just really well done for the age group, you know, like for young kids. It doesn't like water down these ideas, but it shows them in an age appropriate way. Yeah, I thought this was absolutely fantastic. I think it does a really wonderful job too of like connecting the past with the present and some of the things that are happening now with like, yeah, just like history and other things that have happened in our country and the, like the treatment of Black people in our country. So I thought this was brilliant. I gave That Flag 5 stars. Would definitely recommend it. I feel like it hasn't gotten as much buzz as I would think, especially considering who the illustrator is, but really recommend. Then I finished Bygone Badass Broads, 52 Forgotten Women Who Changed the World by Mackenzie Lee, illustrations by Petra Eriksson. This was a present from my friend Julia at Shakespeare and Such a few years ago now, but I finally got to it and I loved it. I've said many times how much I enjoyed this subgenre of like beautifully illustrated historical nonfiction about underappreciated figures from history, and I really liked this one as well. As always with these books, I appreciate when there's a wide variety of figures and like societies and cultures, and this one had that. I really enjoyed the art. I really liked some of the humor, and I appreciate that there was a lot more clarity with the like research and the like examples or the stories that the author used, as opposed to the Women of Myth book I talked about in a previous wrap-up. I feel like the author did a great job of like communicating where she got information from or where she was drawing this, like what parts we know for sure and what parts are based on, you know, well-informed like guessing or predictions. And I also really like that even though this book I feel like is a little more weighted towards like warrior type women, I feel like in general this book really highlights the many different kinds of strength and the many different ways you can be a feminist and a strong woman. So that's something I always appreciate as well. I did give this one 4.5 stars. The only thing I didn't love is, I said I liked some of the humor, but there were also places where it just went like over the top for me. Like specifically the parts where Mackenzie Lee would like literally just like quote internet memes like word for word. It just felt a little odd, and I also think it felt kind of dated because like internet humor moves so quickly that even though this book only came out a couple of years ago, it already feels like those parts already felt, I think, very dated. But overall, really enjoyed this. Next, I finished Lady Liesl's Seaside Surprise by Tansy Rayner Roberts. This is the 4th novella in the, I always forget the name of it. Is it Sympathetic Magic? Tea and Sympathetic Magic? You know the series. I have been really enjoying this series, and this one is more of a companion book. So we're following our main character Liesl instead. We've been following Neme for the other books. So this is of course set by the Seaside. Our main character Liesl has been sent by her family to basically see what's going on with the young woman like who her father just recently married, this like young, beautiful, talented actress, and everybody's kind of like, why did this happen? Why did they get married? And Liesl's family in general really don't like Emma, I think is her name. But Liesl has been sent to her villa to find out what happened to this like family heirloom, and when she's there, she gets drawn into these like friends of Emma's who are visiting and like the art scene kind of, and also some mysteries, some things that are happening at the villa because like there are just some like weird things going on, just like little things that aren't quite adding up. And I loved this. This might be this might be my favorite in the series, or tied for my favorite. I loved Liesl as a main character so much, and I just really enjoyed following her. I thought the mystery of this one was really interesting, and the way the ending played out was also interesting. There's also a sapphic romance in this, which I thought was lovely. I ended up really liking the character that Liesl has this romance with, and I wasn't sure I would initially just because of the way she was kind of talking to Liesl, but I think it was one of those cases where, because Liesl is so like confident, or at least she's so good at appearing confident and sure of herself, even when she's not, I think it made their interactions feel a lot more equal. I thought the world and just like the setting of the series continues to be really interesting. I thought the letter elements were a really interesting touch. I really liked those, even though I didn't expect them to be in here. And I also loved the way that Emma was written, and the way that like this didn't turn into a like you know, women hating other women kind of thing. And Liesl, like, you know that about Liesl from the beginning, that that's not something that she's in favor of. So anyway, I just really loved this. The only thing is, I think there were a couple of things with the ending where the implications of it I don't think were dealt with quite enough. Like, we are clearly supposed to be uncomfortable about some of the things that our characters uncover, but I don't think it was like fully acknowledged, if that makes sense. But I loved this, and I gave it Lady Liesl's Seaside Surprise 5 stars. And if you've been looking for a way to try the author, I do feel like you could maybe jump into that one without having read other books in the series. Like, you definitely know a little more about the world building if you've read the other books, but it is fairly standalone in terms of the characters and everything. Next, I finished How the Word Is Passed, A Reckoning with the History of Slavery Across America by Clint Smith. This was another book in the 12 Books, 12 Friends challenge. My friend Kelly picked this, and I'm really glad she did, because I had been planning to read this one, I think, but this definitely made me prioritize it, and it is absolutely fantastic. It's won so many awards. Everybody talks about how good this is, so I guess I won't like belabor that too much, but yeah, this is a nonfiction book that is about, as it says, a reckoning with slavery in America and that history and how it influences the present as well. And it looks at things like the prison industrial complex and the phenomenon of like Confederate statues, and like the difference between like monuments and like history, or like I was saying about the picture book, the difference between acknowledging history and like glorifying it or romanticizing it. So Clint Smith travels around to like several different places in the US, and then there's also like most of them in the South, but one of them in the northern states, and then one location that is outside of the US. It's in another country, and he like traces the, as I said, the history and legacy of slavery, and I thought this was fantastic. Clint Smith is a poet, and you can definitely tell that in his writing style. He is so good at like communicating these like sensory details, and the way that he writes about this history, it gives it the immediacy that is like the point of this book, is like, yes, this is history, but it is also like our present, and we need to acknowledge that, and we need to do better. I also think he did a really phenomenal job of describing the like different art pieces and like locations, and like there's like, I remember a statue that he's talking about in the Whitney plantation, where he described it so well that I got exactly what he was saying, even though there wasn't a photograph of it in the book. And I did look it up after because I wanted to see what he was talking about, but like I wouldn't have needed to. Like, he just is obviously a very, very talented writer. I think in my TBR I might have said that he's like traveling with like with his son, or like with one of his children, and that's not really what's going on here. So I don't know where I got that, but it does talk about like these different trips that he made, and the different ways of grappling with legacies and with history. And I think this is such a thoughtful and important book, and I know people keep saying that, but like truly I think it is, and I think it's one that especially every American should read, especially given like the book bannings and laws affecting what teachers are allowed to teach in schools and everything. Like, I just think this is incredibly important. I can't find the specific line, but there's just a lot of discussion about that balance of, you know, recognizing what like the founding fathers accomplished and how they can have done great things, but that doesn't mean they were great people. And it's kind of, it doesn't make sense to pretend that. I also think like he uses a lot of like conversations and like interviews with people, and I thought the way that that was integrated into the book was really, really well done. Like, this is just a masterpiece, as everyone says. I know I talked way more about it than I thought I was going to. Who's surprised? But I gave How the Word is Passed 5 stars. Next, I finished The Craft of Love by E.E. Ottoman, and I have to give a special thank you to my friend Kazen from Always Doing, who initially put this on my radar because I bought the ebook on her recommendation, and I finally got around to it for the Trans Rice Readathon, and I absolutely loved it. This was so lovely and so like heartwarming and heart-filling and just really beautiful. So we are following our 2 main characters. One of them, I think his name is Benjamin? I hope I'm right. And he is a trans man. This is around, I think around like the end of the 19th century maybe. And I think it's set in New York. Which I like that kind of setting for turn of the century stuff more than like contemporaries. And he is a silversmith. And then our heroine is a quilter, a quilt maker, like professionally, that's what she does. And I feel so bad I can't remember her name because I read this as an ebook. And the reason they end up crossing paths is that Benjamin finds some old clothing that he would like to have turned into a quilt. And so in exchange, he is going to craft a silver teapot for this woman, and this is about their romance, like their growing like feelings for each other. This book is also about like love and acceptance. Oh, I also should mention that I loved the crafting element. Like, it just made me so happy, and like seeing just the respect that they have for each other's work and how it's art. Like, I loved it. And the story also deals with like people who love you but who don't understand you or who don't try to understand you, and if or how you can try to hold on to the love and, you know, let go of the rest. Like, we see Benjamin dealing with that with his mother's memory. I also thought these characters had really great chemistry together. Like, this is a very short romance, and it's there's no like explicit scenes or anything, but this is just a great example of like how you can have fantastic chemistry between characters when there is like limited physical contact, or sometimes especially when. And I think that this book did that beautifully. I also just, like I said, I loved our 2 leads. I loved them like separately but also together, of course, and how just like supportive and like tender they were. Like, this is just, it's a very like tender, gentle story. And even though it does touch on transphobia and it does touch on grief and like the difficulty of being accepted by everybody, it's still overall a very warm story, and it's just absolutely beautiful. This is like officially one of my new favorite romances. I thought this was just so wonderful, so very grateful to Kazen for putting it on my radar. I gave The Craft of Love 5 stars. Next, I finished Nimona by N.D. Stevenson. This is an old copy. This is a very well-known graphic novel that I somehow didn't really understand the premise of, even though I hear people talk about it a lot. We're following a few different main characters. Nimona is obviously the title character, and she is a young girl who shows up at like this supervillain's place. Like, Lord Blackheart shows up at his place and is like, hey, I'm gonna be your sidekick, like your villain in training. And he's like, no thank you, and she just stays anyway. And eventually he does like warm up to her. We also have Sir Ambrosius Goldenloin and his buddies at the Institution of Law Enforcement and Heroics, but maybe they're not so heroic. And yeah, this is a very well-loved graphic novel, and unfortunately I did not really care for it. I feel like I'm really striking out with like the really hyped like fantasy graphic novels that I've read recently. This is like the 2nd or 3rd. So I'm very sorry to everyone who loves this one. I really wish that I had. I just like some things about it. I really liked Blackheart, actually. He was like the highlight of this book for me. I thought Ambrosius was also an interesting character, and I do think some of the ideas touched on in this graphic novel are interesting, but I don't feel like they were followed through on. Like with regards to like the ethics of what these characters are doing, and especially with Nimona, like I understand, like we get to know more about her backstory, and so I can see why obviously that would affect her, but it doesn't make me okay with what she does. I also didn't I didn't love the ending, although I think I would have. This is one of those cases where if I had liked the characters more, like specifically Nimona, I think I would have been a lot more upset about at the ending, and instead I was just kind of like, all right, whatever. Like, feels a little flat, but okay. And I sort of alluded to this, but the biggest downfall of this story for me was Nimona herself. I could not stand her. I found her so obnoxious and just like unpleasant to follow. I didn't like her. She felt very like, I don't know, like stereotypical, like quirky action girl, except who murders people. And I know that's something other people like, but it's just not for me. Like, I just found her incredibly irritating. Like, even separate from the way I felt about her choices and the way those were portrayed in this story, I just found her very annoying. Yeah, like I just didn't care for her. She really grated on me, and I didn't understand why Ballister cared about her so much, except that he's like a decent person who cares about others, unlike Nimona. Which again, like, I understand her backstory and how that affects this, but I just felt like the story was weirdly flippant about a lot of the things that were happening here. Like, there were just so many parts where like Nimona would like kill somebody for no reason or because she was lazy or something, and I just don't find that funny or quirky. And even though there were moments where it felt like the graphic novel was like trying to deal with that, I don't think it came together for me. Like, I'm very confused as to how we're supposed to feel about some of the things Nimona did. So yeah, I really didn't like this. I gave Nimona like 2.75 stars maybe. Yeah, like the back describes it as brilliantly subversive and sharply irreverent, and I think that's what it was trying to do. I just don't think it succeeded. I mean, keep in mind that I also am not generally a fan of this specific kind of like dark comedy. That may be part of it as well, but yeah, did not have a good time. Then I read Mi Cuerpo y Yo by Jorge Lujan. This was another present from my wonderful friend Mariana from Mariana Mas Books. And she like wrote translations on stickies for me, which was just so lovely. And so the picture book is in Spanish, and it is, yeah, it's My Body and I, or My Body and Me. And I just thought this was really wonderful. Like, the message of this I thought was really lovely. I'm really glad that I got to read this, and it's just like about like being a person with a body and like identity, and I just thought this was really wonderful. And then finally, the last book I read in March, I know this has been so much, but I squeezed in one more Tor.com story, and that is The Ghosts of Sherwood by Carrie Vaughn. And this was actually a present from my friend Katie at A Sea of Tomes. She just gave it to me this year for my birthday, and this is a very short novella, and we're kind of following Marian's perspective and also her daughter Mary. This is set years after the Robin Hood stories and legends and everything, and so Robin and Marian are like married and they have children, and we are primarily following Marian, but I guess like our main character is actually Mary, who is their eldest, and she's a young woman who is kind of at that weird like teen years, but like especially in this time period, people are also starting to think of her as an adult, and she doesn't really know what she wants to do. And yeah, this was like probably the biggest surprise of the month for me, because I really loved this. Like, I obviously thought I would enjoy it, but I didn't expect to love this so much and for it to be just exactly what I wanted to read. There's like a lot of the story of this one is like there's a lot of political conflict in the area right now, like not like the stuff happening during the Robin Hood stories, like not that level, but there's still a lot of like fighting like lords and everything, and a lot of tension. And so Mary and her brother and sister actually end up being kidnapped, and that's kind of like the main action of the story. Robin and Marian are trying to get them back, and Mary is also trying to help her brother and sister escape. And yeah, I just loved this. This was surprisingly cozy considering that there is like a kidnapping as like the big plot point. But I loved the writing, I loved the setting and the story. I think Carrie Vaughn did so much great character work and like setting and story in such a short time. Like, I was just really impressed. I really love the way that this is just one of those stories where like you can tell that it like respects other female characters even when they're not the main characters, which we know I appreciate. I also really enjoyed the like moments of kind of like sneaky, subtle feminism throughout here, which I think that you can do in historical fiction, so I love seeing that. And yeah, I just thought this was a very concise but also very thoughtful and deep and interesting story, and like I gave it 4.5 stars, but I'm like, maybe this is a 5-star because I just like, I really loved this, and I can't really remember anything that I wanted it to do differently, you know? So yeah, I love this. So good. So glad I read it at the end of the month there. Yeah, so those are finally the rest of the books I read in March. If you've been watching all these wrap-ups, bless you. Thank you so much. And please comment down below. Let me know if you have read any of these or something that you're reading now that you're enjoying. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you soon with another video, and I hope you love the next book you read. Bye!